you will find yourself in when you arrive in the place where God wants you to be. And so in our pericope this afternoon, the author writes of this experience that Ezekiel has with Yahweh, that some consider a dream or vision. Or as Abraham Heschel in his book, The Prophet, and some of his contemporaries expound, it was a type of psychological pathology, a prophetic psychosis that resulted in these divine experiences. The prophet's withdrawal into solitude, his ecstatic visions, his disturbances, his social maladjustment are attributed by some to the prophet's psychosis or outright insanity. These prophets, they cried aloud and they spared not. The prophet's insanity was sacred to Israel, believing that the insane person was possessed by a supernatural power. Prophets have the ability to see, to hear, and to sense in ways that others do not. Martin Luther King had a dream, and they called him crazy. Malcolm X refused to shut up, and they called him crazy. Marcus Garvey wanted more for his people, and they called him crazy. Harriet Tubman set up a network of hideouts all the way to the north, and when she threatened to shoot anybody who dared turn back, they called her crazy. And most recently, when Jeremiah Wright spoke up, they'll call him crazy. And some of you here today have been called crazy at least a time or two because you wanted more for your people. But I would rather be called crazy than be called a coward. But I am, my brothers and sisters, convinced that we have abandoned our prophetic tradition. If the church, the black church, dare survive, we must return to our prophetic tradition. That means that we have to get back to prophetic preaching that is born out of a profound spirituality. Thus, Ezekiel begins to give an account of his experience with Yahweh. And in verse 1, he starts off by offering an anthropomorphic attribution to Yahweh, saying, the hand of the Lord came upon me. One translation says it like this: I felt the pressure of Yahweh's hand. Have you ever felt the pressure of God's hand in your life? One of the definitions for pressure is to force someone to a particular end. Is there anybody in here this afternoon who has ever felt the pressure of God's hand compelling you to a certain end, into a certain direction? The pressure always has purpose. Look at your neighbor and say it has purpose. Because the pressure is always with us, we can become acclimated to the pressure of God's hand. But the pressure is not the problem. The real problem is the direction of the pressure of God's hand. Sometimes you will end up asking the question, how did I get here? And God will leave you there long enough until you begin to act and seek a more superior and transcendent question of not why am I, not how did I get here, but why am I here? One thing that you should know is that the pressure of God's hand always has purpose. Unless we be misguided by what we perceive on TV, those of us who are called and who have been summoned into prophetic ministry in our communities must understand that God does not always lead us to mountaintop moments. Pretty hills. That's right. Our plains are hardy hills. Rather, God will lead you into some of the ugliest situations that are apparently void of hope and potential. Is there anybody here tonight that God has put you in a situation that you thought that you would never be in, and you ask yourself, how did I get here? But God will leave you there until you start asking not how did I get here, but why am I here? Is there anybody that knows that when God puts you where God wants you to be, like grandmama said, the Lord will take care of you? Is there anybody in the house that knows that God will take care of you?
Yes, he will.
In modern culture, this becomes hard for us to grasp because the church has become inundated with glamour glory. We have become spiritually sedated with superficiality to the point where I believe that we have lost our sense of what is important. What if God does not take you to where you think that you should go? What if God does not take you to where you are qualified? And what if God does God does not always lead us into mountaintop moments, pretty plains, or hardy hills. This phenomenon is evident in our text. The prophet Ezekiel receives a vision from Yahweh concerning Israel. It is concerning Israel's reestablishment or resurrection as a great nation, a great people of God from utter destruction. And God leads Ezekiel by God's Spirit and sets him down in the middle of a valley. Somebody say in the middle of a valley. Now we cannot pass this by without some consideration. The fact that God set him down or settled him down in the middle of a valley has some significance. When I was at Livingstone, I took a class called Earth Science. And I remember on the final, I had to identify different types of geographical terrain. And one of the identifications that I had to make was that of a valley. And I learned in Earth Science that a valley could be situated between mountains, hills, or through a plain. Now, as it relates to this text, I'm not certain what the makeup of the terrain outside of the valley was. There's no immediate evidence that would allow me to conclude or surmise the outer landscape of a valley. But all I know is that there was a valley. And if there were mountains that contoured the valley, it is interesting that God does not lead Ezekiel to a mountain to look down on the valley. If there were a hill or a plain that contoured this valley, God does not take him up on a hill, nor does not God lead him out on a plain at a distance. But God sets him right in the middle of a valley. This death trap, this open grave, this hell of sorts. And God sets him right down in the middle of a dead place. And anybody that's ever been in a dead place in their life before, can you imagine how Ezekiel must have felt? Here it is, this great prophet has just been introduced to the strangest assignment of his life, a valley. And I cannot imagine this being a part of Ezekiel's plans, but my brothers and sisters, God does not always lead us to mountaintop moments, pretty plains, or hardy hills. Ezekiel begins to assess the nature of his assignment. And he comes and he gives his report. And this is what he discovers upon arrival. He says there were bones. Yes, sir. Lord have mercy.
All right.
They were very many. And they were very dry. These dry bones denoted the downtrodden spirit of Israel. And I can imagine that this vision had to be depressing. God drops Ezekiel right in the middle of a hell, of Sheol. In every direction that he looked, there was nothing but dead things. And I can imagine that Ezekiel got depressed at the presence of these dry, brittle, lifeless bones. And rightfully so, Ezekiel doesn't have anybody to talk to. He's in withdrawal. He's in isolation, like so many of us preachers can go into it. He doesn't have any resources to rely on to help him to determine the possibility of hope for his situation. And he doesn't have another prophet to have a theological discussion about dry bones. Ezekiel finds himself right in the middle of a valley of dry bones, and there was no hope of existence in this open grave. My brothers and sisters, dead and dry places have a way of causing depression. Lord have mercy. He was depressed because it probably felt like there was nothing that he could do. The evidence was seemingly too much for one prophet to handle. And the truth is that once you've been around dead things long enough and depression has set in, it has a way of causing you to assimilate yourself with dead things. But is there anybody in the house that says, I refuse to live a dead life? You may be dead if you want to be dead. You can stay dead if you want to, but I refuse to assimilate myself with dead things. You start checking yourself to make sure that you're still alive. You start checking yourself to make sure that you are okay. It's never comfortable seeing things for what they are. Ezekiel is sitting there by himself in a valley, a dead place with dry bones, asking himself, how did he end up here? He might have said, I'm more qualified than this. This was not in my plans. He was depressed because of the absence of hope. He was angry because at this point he probably feels like there's nothing that he can do about it.